The chandeliers of the Belmore International glistened like frozen lightning, casting shards of gold across the polished marble floor. Guests moved like silk and perfume, unaware that the most extraordinary conversation of the day was unfolding just meters away, between a man in an immaculate navy suit and a voice on the other end of a phone line speaking flawless Dutch. Adrian Cross, 38, self-made millionaire and owner of half the properties on Fifth Avenue, had stepped into the hotel lobby to inspect a newly acquired asset. His presence was enough to make staff stand straighter, their smiles sharper. But today, something else caught his attention. A woman in a simple housekeeping uniform stood partially hidden behind an ornate marble column, her voice flowing like water in a language Adrian knew well from his years in Amsterdam. The tone was precise, the pronunciation immaculate, not learned from textbooks, but lived. Mijn motivatiebrief is misschien te laat aangekomen, zei ze zacht, uitleggend aan de beller, blijkbaar een professor aan de Universiteit van Amsterdam, that her motivation letter might not have arrived on time. Her words were confident, but beneath them, he detected the careful restraint of someone who had learned to navigate a world that underestimated her. Adrian wasn't the only one listening. 10 paces away, the hotel's general manager, Victoria Haynes, stood frozen, her lips tightening into the kind of smile that hides teeth. Adrian had seen that look before, management catching an employee breaking a rule they intended to make an example of. "Johnson, my office." "Now." Victoria's voice sliced through the lobby like cold steel. The walk to the administrative wing was long, the air heavier with each step. Behind that door, the manager didn't waste time. "No phones during working hours, and certainly not in the lobby," she began. "And what was that? French?" "Dutch," came the quiet correction. "I don't care if it was Martian. The owner saw a cleaning woman chatting in a foreign language instead of working. You're lucky I'm not firing you." The punishment was swift and calculated. Reassignment to the convention center restrooms for 3 months. Double shifts after corporate events. No overtime. Adrian, still in the lobby, had heard every word. That night, as the city glittered outside his penthouse, Adrian couldn't shake the image of her, the precision of her speech, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. A Georgetown-educated linguist, reduced to scrubbing floors in his hotel? The thought sat wrong in his gut. The next morning, before the staff could settle into their routines, a call went out from his office. "Bring Zoe Johnson to the top floor, now." She arrived wary, expecting termination. Instead, she found herself in a room larger than her apartment, standing before a man who had built an empire by recognizing hidden value. Adrian folded his hands, studying her. "Dutch, Mandarin, French? 6 languages?" he asked. "Tell me, Ms. Johnson, why are you cleaning my floors instead of negotiating my international contracts?" Zoe hesitated, the question hanging between them like a challenge. "I've applied for positions here 47 times, she said finally, her voice steady. 12 internal transfer requests, all ignored. By whom?" Adrian's tone was quiet, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "Victoria Haynes and Mark Leland, Director of Operations." Adrian leaned back in his leather chair, the skyline of Manhattan burning gold behind him. He'd heard Leland complain endlessly about the shortage of multilingual staff for international clients. Yet here was a Georgetown-educated linguist, fluent in 6 languages, cleaning his lobby floors. The contradiction was too sharp to ignore. He closed the file with a decisive snap. "Tomorrow, the International Trade Forum begins. Dutch and Mandarin delegates. We need someone fluent in both languages, someone who understands cultural nuance. You start today as Interim International Relations Coordinator. Temporary for now. Compensation, $5,000 a week." Zoe blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. $5,000 a week was more than 3 months' wages in housekeeping. "Why me?" she asked cautiously. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "Because I heard you speak Dutch like a native. Because your qualifications are wasted where they are, and because I suspect something in this hotel is very wrong." Within the hour, she was in the VIP suite, reviewing documents for the conference. It didn't take long for her trained eye to catch the mistakes, translation errors in Mandarin that weren't just clumsy, but potentially insulting in a diplomatic setting. She quickly rewrote the welcome packets, replacing phrases that, in a Chinese boardroom could have derailed negotiations entirely. How did you know those were wrong? Adrian's voice came from the doorway. The translator knows the language, but not the culture, Zoe explained, pointing to a critical line in the partnership proposal. This phrasing suggests the client is inferior. It's offensive. Adrian's expression hardened. Leland assured me he hired the best. These translations cost a fortune. Then you overpaid, Zoe said simply. She didn't yet know that the translation contract belonged to Leland's niece, someone with no verified credentials, but a steady stream of inflated invoices. The next morning, Zoe moved between the Dutch and Chinese delegations as if born to the role, switching languages mid-sentence, smoothing introductions, bridging misunderstandings before they formed. Executives who'd taken years to warm to one another were shaking hands by noon. That afternoon, Leland approached her for the first time in 6 years. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Impressive work, Ms. Johnson. Seems Victoria may have underestimated you. Zoe met his gaze evenly. I find it interesting my resume, with fluent in Mandarin printed in bold, was overlooked, especially when the hotel spent $50,000 on inadequate translation services. His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, she added, I have confirmation of every application I submitted, and of the translation errors flagged for past events, all ignored. She didn't mention the quiet help she was now receiving from HR's newest analyst, a young woman named Serena, who had been appalled to find Zoe's credentials buried for years. Together, they were piecing together a pattern. By the end of day 2, Zoe had more than her new job title. She had the beginnings of proof that this was more than oversight. This was a system designed to keep certain talents invisible. And Adrian Cross? He wasn't just watching anymore. He was preparing for a reckoning. By the third morning of the trade forum, the Beaumont Royale was humming with the kind of quiet urgency that only comes when millions of dollars hang on the outcome of a conversation. Zoe was in her element, navigating between Dutch and Mandarin with the fluidity of a conductor guiding an orchestra. In one corner of the grand ballroom, she was explaining a cultural nuance to the Dutch delegation. Minutes later, she was mediating a delicate translation for the Chinese executives that saved the hotel from a potentially embarrassing misstep. The whispers began. Staff who once ignored her now asking, "Who is she?" But Zoe wasn't there just to impress. She was watching, listening, collecting threads. During a short break, she noticed Leland in the hallway, speaking to a young woman clutching a leather folder marked Final Translation, Master Contract. The surname on the badge hit her like a jolt. Whitmore. Leland's niece. Zoe slowed as she passed them, just enough to glimpse the first page inside the folder. Her stomach tightened. The same errors she just corrected were back. Whoever had prepared these documents hadn't even attempted to fix them. That afternoon, she found Adrian in his office. "They're replacing my corrected translations," she said, placing a set of comparison pages on his desk. "With flawed versions, the same ones from before." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Are you certain?" "I have screenshots, timestamps, and copies of the original files. And I've confirmed this isn't the first time. I've found records of inflated payments to her company going back years, while qualified candidates were repeatedly rejected." Before Adrian could reply, Serena from HR appeared in the doorway, a thick folder in her hands. "You need to see this," she said. Inside were hiring records from the last 5 years, applications from highly qualified, multilingual candidates, overwhelmingly from minority backgrounds, stamped rejected without interview. Adrian flipped through the pages, each one deepening the set of his mouth. "This is systematic," he said finally, "and it ends now." The moment was interrupted by the sharp click of shoes in the hallway. Leland walked in without knocking. "The Dutch are ready to sign," he announced, "but they've spotted inconsistencies in the translations. Johnson must have—" "Careful," Adrian said, his voice low and even. "We've reviewed the translations. The only inconsistencies came from your niece's work." "That's absurd," Leland began, but Zoe cut in, her tone professional but unyielding. "I confirmed with Peking University this morning. They've never certified her. Her credentials are fabricated." Leland's mask slipped. "You're nobody, A cleaning woman who thinks she can PhD in applied linguistics from Georgetown, Zoe replied evenly. 6 international publications and a full record of every internal transfer request. You silence. Adrian stood, closing the distance between them. I'm calling an emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. By then, I expect your resignation on my desk. For the first time in years, Zoe felt the balance shift, not just for her, but for every invisible talent still trapped behind a mop or broom. The reckoning Adrian had promised was no longer coming. It had arrived. Today, Adrian began, his voice carrying easily across the hushed room, we address a matter that goes beyond this hotel. For years, certain leaders in this property have operated outside the values we claim to uphold. They have buried talent, misallocated resources, and, most damning of all, implemented discriminatory hiring practices that have cost us millions. Behind him, the massive projection screen lit up with hard evidence. Charts comparing employee qualifications with their assigned positions, hiring rejection rates by race and gender, and invoices for translation services inflated to triple the market rate, all linked to companies owned by relatives of hotel executives. A murmur rippled through the room. Adrian didn't pause. Last week, Dr. Zoe Johnson, he gestured toward her, prevented a diplomatic disaster by correcting flawed Mandarin translations for our international guests. Those same translations were produced by a contractor with falsified credentials, personally approved and protected by our director of operations. Gasps. All eyes turned toward Leland, seated 2 rows from the front. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Effective immediately, Adrian continued, Mark Leland is terminated for cause. His access to all systems is revoked. 2 security officers stepped forward. The room seemed to collectively inhale. Leland rose, color draining from his face. His gaze darted to Zoe, the hatred in his eyes barely contained, but he said nothing as the officers escorted him out. Adrian turned to another name. Victoria Haynes, General Manager. Pending a full investigation into your role in suppressing internal transfer applications, you are suspended. The older woman stiffened, her carefully cultivated composure cracking as whispers swelled behind her. And now, Adrian said, allowing a pause just long enough for the tension to peak. Effective immediately, Dr. Zoe Johnson is appointed our new Global Director of Internal Communications, overseeing all multilingual operations for the Beaumont Royale Group. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the back rows erupted. Housekeeping staff, servers, and maintenance crews, people who had worked beside Zoe for years, were on their feet, clapping with a kind of raw pride that filled the air more powerfully than any corporate applause could. Zoe stepped forward, the weight of the moment pressing in. She didn't gloat, didn't glance at the people who had once dismissed her. Instead, she looked toward the staff in the back, the ones in faded uniforms, and gave a small, deliberate nod. The message was clear. This isn't just my victory. From the corner of her eye, Zoe caught Adrian watching her, not with the satisfaction of a man who had fixed a problem, but with the recognition of someone who understood this was only the beginning. Because the truth was, what happened today wasn't the end of the fight, it was the opening shot in a much larger war. The applause from the auditorium still echoed in Zoe's ears as she stepped into her new office for the first time. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan stretched out in every direction, the city glittering in the afternoon light. The brass nameplate on the door read, Dr. Zoe Johnson, Global Director of Internal Communications. For a long moment, she stood still, taking it in. 6 years ago, she'd entered this building through the service entrance. Today, she was at the very top, but the satisfaction was bittersweet. She knew how many others, just as capable, were still trapped on the wrong side of opportunity. Her first official meeting as director was with Adrian Cross in the newly assembled Reform Committee. The conference room was sleek and modern, but the stack of documents waiting for her told a much older story. Years of buried talent, silenced applications, and quietly vanished opportunities. We're not here to celebrate a single promotion, Adrian began, his voice deliberate. We're here to make sure what happened to you never happens again. Zoe laid out her vision, a program called Invisible Talents, designed to identify overlooked employees across every property in the Beaumont Royale Group. HR databases would be combed for unused skills, languages, degrees, certifications, buried under service titles. Those employees would be matched to roles that used their expertise, bypassing the gatekeepers who had kept them invisible. Serena from HR, her unexpected ally, presented the pilot data they'd quietly collected during the trade forum. In just 3 months, they had identified over 100 employees with advanced qualifications, 83% of them from minority backgrounds, working in positions far below their capabilities. The financial implications were staggering. Outsourcing translation costs could drop by 78%, while client satisfaction scores would rise. But to Zoe, the numbers were just the proof for something she already knew in her bones. This was about dignity. Her first act as director was personal. She called in Rosa, a housekeeper from the 15th floor, who had been tutoring her colleagues in Spanish after hours. Rosa had a degree in hospitality management from her home country, ignored by management for years. Now she was being promoted to guest experience coordinator for the Latin American market. Word spread like wildfire. The cleaning staff, once invisible in the hotel's hierarchy, began to walk a little taller. The quiet murmurs in the employee cafeteria turned into open conversations about goals, ambitions, and skills long hidden. But not everyone was pleased. Victoria Haynes, suspended and under investigation, was seen leaving the building with a look that promised she wasn't finished. And Leland's allies, those who had benefited from his nepotism, were already whispering about ways to undermine the new order. Zoe knew change wouldn't come without resistance, but she also knew something else. Adrian was on her side, and together they weren't just changing one hotel. They were setting a precedent the entire hospitality industry would have to face. As she looked out at the skyline that night, the reflection in the glass was no longer just her own. It was layered with the faces of every employee who'd ever been told they didn't belong in the rooms where decisions were made. Now the doors to those rooms were open, and Zoe intended to keep them that way. 3 weeks into her new role, Zoe sat at the head of a long walnut conference table. The Invisible Talents Task Force gathered around her. On the wall, a map of the United States was dotted with pins, each representing a Beaumont Royale property. The first reports from the pilot program had arrived. In New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and Chicago, employees once hidden in kitchens, laundry rooms, and janitorial closets were now running guest services, managing events, and coordinating international contracts. The numbers spoke for themselves. Revenue from international conferences was up 42%, guest satisfaction ratings at an all-time high. But the most striking change wasn't in the spreadsheets. It was in the hallways. Staff who once avoided eye contact with executives now greeted them without fear. Conversations in multiple languages filled the break rooms. The hotel no longer felt like two separate worlds, the polished front in the invisible back. Still, Zoe knew success painted a target on her back. Victoria Haynes's investigation was still ongoing, and rumors swirled that she was lobbying old allies to reinstate her. Some department heads, comfortable in the old system, complained that the new promotions disrupted hierarchy. And while Adrian Cross stood firmly beside Zoe, she could feel the quiet pushback in the way certain emails went unanswered or meeting invitations arrived late. One afternoon, while reviewing training schedules, Serena from HR entered Zoe's office, her face tense. "You need to see this," she said, handing over a printed memo. It was an anonymous complaint to the board, accusing Zoe of favoritism and promoting underqualified staff for optics. Zoe read it twice, her expression calm but her chest tight. She knew exactly what this was, an attempt to weaponize her reforms against her. Instead of reacting in anger, she went to Adrian. "They're trying to frame this as reverse discrimination," she said. Adrian leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Then we give them proof they can't ignore. Full transparency. We'll publish the qualifications of every promoted employee and their performance metrics. Let the results speak." The next week, a detailed report went out to the entire organization. It listed each promotion, the employee's qualifications, and the measurable improvements in their departments since the change. Numbers didn't lie. The backlash died almost overnight. But the victory wasn't just political, it was personal. Zoe received an email from Rosa, the former housekeeper she'd promoted, now managing a high-profile corporate event. "I finally feel like I'm using everything I've learned. Thank you for seeing me. That night, standing in her office as the city lights flickered on, Zoe realized something profound. The fight wasn't simply about dismantling an unjust system. It was about proving that when you give people the chance to rise, they lift everything around them. And she was just getting started. By the second month of the Invisible Talents program, Zoe's reforms had spread across the Beaumont Royale network like a quiet revolution. Hotels in Dallas, Boston, and San Francisco were reporting similar transformations. Overlooked staff stepping into roles they were born for, departments running smoother than ever, guest satisfaction climbing with every survey. But not everyone welcomed the change. One Tuesday morning, Zoe's assistant buzzed her. "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." The door opened before Zoe could answer. Victoria Haynes walked in, dressed in sharp gray, every line of her posture telegraphing controlled defiance. "I thought you'd be gone by now," Victoria said, her voice low but edged with venom. "Suspension isn't the same as reinstatement," Zoe replied evenly, "and your investigation isn't over." Victoria's smile was thin. "You think you've won, but the higher you climb, the sharper the fall. You'll find this hotel isn't as loyal as you think." Zoe didn't flinch. "It's not loyalty to me that matters. It's loyalty to the truth. And the truth is, you blocked qualified people from advancing for years. That's what the investigation will show." Victoria left without another word, but the encounter lingered in Zoe's mind. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Later that week, during a strategy meeting with Adrian, she brought it up. "She's not done," Zoe said. "If she can't get her position back, she'll try to discredit the program." Adrian's expression was calm but watchful. "Then we make it unassailable, expand it faster, make it so embedded in our success that removing it would be unthinkable." So they did. Within days, Zoe and her team rolled out the Mentor Match initiative, pairing newly promoted employees with seasoned leaders who had no stake in the old hierarchy. The aim was to not only fill positions, but to build a culture where talent recognized talent, regardless of background. One of Zoe's favorite matches was Jamal, a night security guard fluent in Japanese thanks to his years abroad, paired with the head of international guest services in Tokyo. Within weeks, Jamal was negotiating directly with Japanese travel partners, landing contracts the hotel had been chasing for years. The results spoke louder than any criticism could. Still, Zoe kept her guard up. Anonymous emails criticizing her agenda occasionally appeared in her inbox. A rumor circulated that certain executives were compiling a dossier of mistakes to present to the board. But Zoe wasn't the same woman who had once hidden behind a marble column to take a call. Now she had allies, results, and a platform, and she intended to use all three. That night, standing by her office window, she looked down at the lobby where her journey had begun. The chandelier still glistened, the marble still shone, but the air felt different, because the invisible were no longer invisible, and no warning, no smear campaign was going to change that. The winter air over Manhattan was crisp the morning Zoe stepped onto the stage of the Grand Summit Hospitality Conference. The annual event drew the most powerful figures in the industry: owners, CEOs, policymakers, people who shaped the direction of hotels across the globe. This year, Zoe wasn't there to take notes in the back row. She was the keynote speaker. Adrian Cross had insisted she be given the platform. "If we want change beyond our walls, we need to put it in theirs," he'd told her. The ballroom was a sea of tailored suits and diamond cufflinks. As Zoe approached the podium, she caught sight of familiar faces. Rosa, now representing Latin American markets. Jamal, fresh from securing a multi-million-dollar contract in Japan. They were proof that her reforms weren't just numbers in a report. They were people whose lives had shifted permanently. She began without preamble. "6 months ago, I was scrubbing marble floors in one of the properties owned by this very hotel group. I held a PhD in linguistics, spoke 6 languages, and had sent over 40 job applications within the company. Every one of them was rejected without interview." The room stilled. Even the servers paused in their tracks. "I wasn't invisible because I lacked skill," Zoe continued. "I was invisible because the system decided I didn't belong in the rooms where decisions are made. My story isn't unique. Across our industry, talent is being buried under uniforms, overlooked because of race, gender, accent, or the assumptions we make the moment we see someone's name tag. A murmur rippled through the audience, some shifting uncomfortably. "But here's the truth," she said, her voice steady. "When you invest in the people you already have, when you look past the role and see the human being, you don't just change their life, you change your bottom line." Our program at Beaumont Royale increased international client satisfaction by 42%, cut translation outsourcing costs by 78%, and uncovered 147 employees whose skills were being wasted. She gestured to the screen behind her, where before and after profiles of promoted staff flashed, uniforms replaced with business attire, job titles transformed, faces lit with confidence. From the audience, Adrian watched the effect ripple outward. Heads nodded, pens scribbled notes. Competitors were already calculating how to implement something similar. But not everyone smiled. Near the back, Zoe spotted Victoria Haynes, her expression unreadable. She was technically still under investigation, yet here she was, listening. Zoe closed with the words her mother had once told her. "No matter how much they try to make you invisible, your worth is not dependent on their recognition." When she stepped away from the podium, the applause was sustained, real. Not polite, not forced. In the networking session afterward, industry leaders approached her with offers to collaborate, requests for guidance, and in one case, an invitation to consult on national diversity standards in hospitality. Later, alone in her hotel suite, Zoe stared at the city skyline. She thought about the day Adrian had called her to the top floor, about the moment she'd chosen to step into the fight instead of walking away. She realized now this wasn't just about fixing one hotel. It was about rewriting the rules for an entire industry. And she had no intention of stopping here. 6 months after the Grand Summit, the Invisible Talents program had become the most talked about initiative in the hospitality industry. Trade magazines ran features on it. Competitors quietly tried to replicate it. Government agencies reached out to explore policy-level adoption. Zoe Johnson's calendar was a blur of meetings, interviews, and cross-country site visits, but she always returned to the Beaumont Royal headquarters, her anchor, and the place where it had all begun. One rainy Tuesday, she walked through the lobby, her heels clicking against the same marble she once scrubbed. Staff greeted her with nods and genuine smiles. The new bell captain was a former security guard with a degree in logistics. The woman arranging flowers in the lobby had once worked in laundry, but was now a certified event designer. Everywhere she looked, change was visible. In her office, Serena from HR was waiting with a thick folder. "We've completed the year-end audit," she said. "You're going to want to see this." Zoe flipped it open. Inside were the numbers. Employee retention up 37%, guest satisfaction up 45%, international conference bookings doubled. But it was the final page that made her pause. Letters from staff across the country, each one telling a story of someone who'd been promoted, mentored, or recognized for the first time in their career. One letter stood out. It was from Miguel, a night janitor in Dallas. He'd been teaching himself Italian for years in the hope of working with the hotel's European tour groups. Under the program, he'd been promoted to a liaison role, and last month, he'd led his first international delegation. "For the first time," he wrote, "I wake up excited to come to work." The transformation was undeniable, and yet Zoe knew the fight wasn't over. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Adrian stepped in, holding an envelope. "For you," he said simply. She opened it to find an embossed invitation from the University of Amsterdam, offering her a position as a visiting professor in applied linguistics. Her mind flashed back to that day in the lobby, hiding behind the marble column, speaking Dutch into her phone. "Seems like full circle," Adrian said with a faint smile. "It does," Zoe replied, "but I'm not done here yet." That afternoon, she made an announcement to her leadership team. The Beaumont Royale Foundation would launch a new scholarship program, not just for employees, but for their children. Funded in part by her own salary, it would give others the chance to study, travel, and work without the barriers she had faced. The first recipient would be Rosa's teenage daughter, who dreamed of becoming a hotel manager. As the rain cleared that evening, Zoe stood by her office window, watching the city lights shimmer. Somewhere below, guests arrived in sleek cars, luggage wheels rolling over the marble. To them, it was just a luxury hotel. To her, it was proof. Proof that a single act, a phone call in Dutch, could be the stone that starts an avalanche. And for the first time in years, Zoe allowed herself to believe that the avalanche had only just begun. Spring sunlight streamed through the Beaumont Royale's glass atrium, casting warm light across the lobby. Zoe Johnson descended the grand staircase, no longer as an invisible worker, but as the global director who had rewritten the rules. That morning, she had just finished presenting the final annual report to the board. The numbers were undeniable: record profits, record employee satisfaction, and international partnerships stronger than ever. But the part that mattered most to Zoe wasn't on any chart. It was the change in faces. The concierge was a former night porter who spoke 5 languages. The catering director had once been a line cook with a master's degree in nutrition. The hotel's marketing lead was a former bellhop who'd been taking night classes in digital design. Everywhere she turned, she saw the same truth. When people are given a chance to rise, they don't just improve their own lives. They lift everyone around them. After the meeting, Adrian found her in the garden terrace, where cherry blossoms swayed in the spring breeze. "You've built something bigger than this hotel," he said quietly. Zoe smiled. "We've built it, and we're not finished." She thought about her mother, how she'd worked as a maid her whole life, armed with a college degree that no one had cared to see. Her mother had always told her, "They can try to make you invisible, but your worth isn't theirs to decide." For years, Zoe had believed those words were about surviving injustice. Now she understood they were also about changing the system so that injustice had nowhere to hide. That afternoon, in a quiet ceremony streamed to every property in the Beaumont Royale network, Zoe announced the first recipients of the Beaumont Royale Scholarship Fund. Among them was Rosa's daughter, now preparing to study hospitality management. There were tears, applause, and the kind of joy that couldn't be faked. "This," Zoe said to the camera, "is what real success looks like. Not just climbing the ladder yourself, but making sure the ladder is there for the next person." And that was the heart of it, the message she wanted everyone to take away. True power isn't in titles or salaries. It's in the doors you open for others. True justice isn't just exposing those who discriminate. It's rebuilding the system so that talent, no matter where it comes from, has a place to shine. As the feed ended, Zoe lingered for a moment, looking into the camera as if speaking directly to each person watching. "If Zoe's journey has moved you," the narrator's voice closed in warmly, "remember, there are countless untold stories like hers, stories of people underestimated, overlooked, yet capable of extraordinary things. Here we tell them all. If you want to see the next chapter of courage, justice, and transformation, stay with us." A pause, a soft smile. "Like this video, subscribe, and be here for the next story that proves greatness can come from anywhere."